Welcome to Larry King Now. Our guest today is Professor, erstwhile advertising executive, and writer Bob Mitchell, who has penned a stirring memoir about the paradoxes of life as he faced the potential of death. It's called Time for a Heart-to-Heart, Reflections on Life in the Face of Death. It's available now, and I was proud to write the foreword for this terrific book. Why'd you write it?
You know, I had no intention of writing a memoir because I'm a novelist. But my wonderful wife, Susan, who's saved my life many, many times, she said, you really should write this. And I said, no, I'm a novelist, it's a memoir. And then a couple weeks later, you know, you should write this, really. And I said, it's for people who are convicted felons or celebrity, you know. And then finally she said, you must write this. And I said to myself, you know, I really should.
You had a successful life, professor, Harvard graduate?
Well, successful, I'm not sure, but I talk about success and failure in the book, and yeah, I had an interesting life.
What happened to your heart? What happened to you at what age?
Well, I was 41, and I had a massive MI, myocardial infarction, and fell to the floor during my 7-year-old's birthday party. Sarah, she's 37 now.
Any history of heart disease? Not
at all. My dad, it was genetics, because I was always a very good athlete. I was 3 sports in college and so on, but it just happened. And, you know, I had a quadruple bypass. Always behind you. You had a quintuple.
Right.
And then, you know, it became more and more serious as years went by. I had a defibrillator in 1998, and my first passionate kiss of my present wife, Susan, I fell to the floor, my defibrillator exploded, and she thought she was a murderess. It was a terrible moment. But it got worse and worse. I had 54% scar tissue in my heart, and finally, a couple of years ago, I had a series of ventricular tachycardia and was basically dead, and my wife saved me with CPR and on, but...
you got a heart transplant.
I got a heart and a kidney transplant, because 2 months into the waiting for a new heart, they found a cancerous tumor in my right kidney, so they took me off the waiting list, and it was a mess. I was dead, basically.
They did both transplants?
Both. Same time, same donor. He was 29 years old, a male, and 6 hours of the heart, and then an intermission, and then 6 hours for the kidney. It was a 12-hour surgery, and it was intense.
One of the obvious is, why are you alive?
That's a great question. You've done this before, haven't you? Why am I alive? You know, I think a lot of things saved my life. One was Cedars-Sinai, because I was there at the right time. They're one of the few hospitals in the world that I was almost 71, and it was really, really lucky timing. And I'm not sure, my wife, Susan, did a lot to save my life. The people at Cedars-Sinai. Cedars-Sinai
here?
In LA, right. Wonderful, wonderful people there.
My hospital.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I had an Italian thoracic surgeon, Alfredo Trento, who was fantastic. And just before I went under...
Very famous.
I'm sorry, yes, he's pretty... and I speak Italian, so we talked, and I said to him before I went under, I said, in culo alla balena, which means in the whale's ass in Italian. It was a very lovely, it's a good luck, really, but...
You had near-death experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I was passed out on the ground 4 or 5 times. I had 12 defibrillator shocks. When I got to the hospital, I was on life support IV for 100 days. And then when they found the cancer, I was off the list, so...
Life support for 100 days?
Yeah, dobutamine, milrinone, all the cocktail of stuff, so...
Any coma?
Not a coma, but I was unconscious a number of times before I was admitted.
You write about it eloquently.
Thank you.
How do you do... I never really... See, when I had my heart attack and then I had quintuple, I never thought I would die.
Right.
I asked the question when I had the heart, am I going to die? When they told me it was the right side and then I needed the body, I was scared, but not death scared.
Right.
What you had near death, like what? Give me an example of one.
Well, you know, in the hospital, I was almost unconscious, but you know, my heart was not functioning at all, and I'd lost 35 pounds and so on and so forth. What kept me going, I think, besides my wife Susan and the hospital and so on, is my positive attitude. I refused to give in, maybe from my athletic background, but I had a very interesting talk with Alfredo, and I asked him, I said, you know, my heart is of a certain condition and you have certain skills. Isn't there any room for positive thinking and, you know, will to live and all? And he said, absolutely, there's been a lot of research on it. He explained that there's a neurobiochemical effect of a good attitude on the body. I had to look it up, but I believed him. And I really think that's what got me through a lot of that stuff. It's
Positive thinking.
Positive thinking and knowing that you're going to succeed. In the book, I use a couple of examples. One of them is, there's a song by my favorite Italian singer, Francesco De Gregori, and it's about a 12-year-old soccer player named Nino. And there's a line, ma Nino non aver paura di sbagliare un calcio di rigore, which is Nino is not afraid of missing a penalty kick. And I use that as a metaphor, as a real experience of my own, that I was not going to give in. And you have two choices, fear or hope in life. People do, every day. But when you're waiting for hard, it's particularly you know, intense. And you could either say, I'm going to fail, I'm going to miss, I'm going to let my teammates down, myself down, or you're going to say, I'm going to make this because I'm prepared. And that was my attitude all the way through. And they told me, and many of my cardiologists said, this is what, you have two hearts of the same bad condition, and the one that belongs to a person with positive thoughts versus one who's sort of giving up. There's a big difference. It's huge.
What is your situation right now?
I feel fantastic. I have a 31-year-old heart. I'm in great shape. I keep in great shape. You know, ironically, this whole situation with my heart had nothing to do with my physical fitness or my diet, because I had always very fit and had a great diet. It was genetic. And now with the new heart, I'm just feeling great. And
our guest today is writer Bob Mitchell. We're discussing the lessons Bob has learned from his remarkable experience right after the break. The book, Time for a Heart-to-Heart, Reflections on Life in the Face of Death. We'll be right back. We're back with Bob Mitchell, author of Time for a Heart-to-Heart, a terrific book. What'd you learn about yourself? You said, I just became so acutely aware of conflicts, pride against humility, failure and success. What did you learn?
Well,
did you change?
I didn't change deep down, but I spent 100 days in the hospital, in 4 hospitals, mostly at Cedars-Sinai. And I spent about 10 hours a day thinking. And I had a lot of time on my hands, and you know, I didn't sleep very much. But I learned a lot about myself that was already there, but that I've been thinking about and teaching and writing about for well over 50 years. And it all sort of came into focus while I was sitting there and thinking about things. So I learned about what I knew, but it was sort of new for me.
Since you've gone through it, what do you tell people they should pay more attention to?
In general?
Yeah, that they don't.
That's a good question. You know, I think I can't give any medical advice. Obviously, I'm not an MD, but I always talk to people about this thing we discussed before, positive thinking. I mean, it's sort of a cliche, but
smell the flowers.
Smell the flowers. You know, there's a great line that I mentioned in the book of country music, George Strait. I almost went off the road when I heard it first, and it was, I ain't never saw a hearse with a luggage rack. And I think it's something to keep in mind. You forget it all the time, I know I do, but after my surgery, not so much, that every day is a blessing, it's a joy, so you have to live it to the fullest.
I'm told, and you would have to have been told this too, that at medical school, the one thing they pay the least attention to is nutrition.
Right.
And the thing they pay no attention to, or maybe it's changed, is doctor-patient relationship. For the how does a doctor deal with a patient? You lecture on that.
I do. I have actually reached out to some major medical schools / hospital centers like Mount Sinai in New York and Columbia and Georgetown, great places. And I give a lecture, about a 45-minute lecture about the physician-patient relationships. And you know, it's so important. Doctors are running around doing rounds, and they see this guy for 5 minutes and a woman for 3 minutes, and it's hard to really have them get deeply into your narrative, what they call a narrative. But I think it's really important because you know, they need to spend time knowing what you're feeling, and they take care of all the X's and O's and all the numbers, but it's much more than numbers, obviously, and as much as they can know about a patient, I think it's really, really helpful.
Dr. DeBakey, the great heart surgeon,
right,
told me that 1, he always takes the patient home in his head. Two, if he's operating the next day, he's not operating on it. He's operating on Norman, whose wife's name is Selma, whose children's names are this.
Right.
He's how old? This is what he does for a living.
Right.
I care about him.
Yep. That's so essential. A lot of doctors know that, but they should be more conscious of it. In the book, I quote one of my favorite poems, Musée des Beaux-Arts of W.H. Auden. And in it, it's about Icarus who falls from the sky, and because the wings of wax that his father Daedalus made melted, he got too close to the sun. And there's a line that I talked to the doctors about that said, the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something awesome, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. And I think you have to have, as a patient, the feeling that even though they're rushed, doctors never want to sail calmly on and just see you for a second and see you as a number. And that DeBakey quote is very, very telling. It's a very good one.
Do you want a doctor who, someone said, if you fall down on the street, you don't want a doctor who says, Bob, how are you? I care about you. I love you. Yeah. You want a doctor who methodically goes about getting you better.
Sure. Yeah,
right? So there's a fine line here.
Exactly. I mean, their job description is not to make friends with you, but, you know, there is a fine line, and I think you do appreciate, you know, just a little smile or an update that was unsolicited, something like that means a lot to a patient, I think, and they need to know. I mean, I write a lot about self-belief and things that come from yourself that makes you strong and getting through this, but the doctors personalizing your being is, I think, very, very essential too.
I once spoke at a medical center where there were 600 people, all of whom had received a heart transplant, the whole room. And I interviewed the guy who did the first one, the South African doctor.
Right.
What was his name again?
Bernard, Christian Bernard.
Christian Bernard. Yes. And the fascinating thing to me is, what's it like to have another heart?
You know, there was a book a while ago by a woman who had a new heart and actually felt that she had received from it certain feelings. I don't really put stock in that personally, but it feels, you know, you don't feel anything mystical about somebody else's. So I think you just feel great. I mean, I have a 31-year-old heart now that's working very well, and so far so good.
And for a kidney, I've talked to others who say that once you get a kidney transplant, you immediately feel better.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, I was really in bad shape with my heart, but my numbers, my kidney numbers, the kidney function numbers, which is a creatinine, they were like, to the roof, they were like 4.1 instead of 2 or 1. And now it's 0.7 with my new kidney. Yeah, that affects you immediately. It takes a while for the heart to heal. But
it's an honor to write the forward, and great to meet you.
Thank you so
This
much.
is a terrific book. Thanks to my guest, Bob Mitchell. Time for a Heart-to-Heart. Reflections on life in the face of death. It's available now. And as always, you can find me on Twitter at King's Things. I'll see you next time.